Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah daf Samach Daled. We're going to get started from the end of Samach Gimel Amud Bet. We're going to go back there for a quick minute. We saw these three rabbis, Yativ Rav Nachman, Ula, and Avimi Bar Papi, and they were sitting together, and Rabbi Chia Bar Ami was with them. By the way, I looked into this after class, why it says it like that. Why didn't it just say these four rabbis were together? Tosfot actually answers the question, says that Rabbeinu Tam says that every time it says, and someone was sitting with them, it's because they're the ones who are usually the ones who bring the chidush. Like they're the ones who are going to say something, and that's why it says they were sitting with that person, and then that person had something to say. The problem is that in our case, we're actually going to have three situations today where the three of them were sitting together with Bechir Bar Ami, and in each case it's going to be Rav Nachman who brings the psak and not this Rabbi Chia Bar Ami. So Tosfot suggests that perhaps there's another case in Ketubot, and perhaps where there was these same four rabbis, and in that case Rabbi Chia Bar Ami was the one who answered, and maybe perhaps because of that these stories got told in this way, but even though it doesn't really fit these particular stories. That's just a total aside. And now let's get to their question. Their question was, if you get hired by a non-Jew, or you get hired, it doesn't really matter who hired you, to break Yeh Nesach barrels. So, are you allowed to do this? Because you're actually getting rid of Yeh Nesach in the world, which is important because it says Abei Tabdu, and you're supposed to get rid of idols. On the other hand, and it's not really are you allowed to do it, are you allowed to benefit from the salary you get? Because the salary is actually, well, we're going to see the problem in a minute, but so one would say, of course, because it's a good thing to do. The other opinion says, or the other side is to say, but wait, you actually want the Avodah Zarah to be in existence so that you can break them, right? If you were to get hired and then immediately someone else destroyed them or dumped all the wine out and you wouldn't be able to do your job, you'd be upset because you wouldn't make a salary. So therefore, your salary is actually appreciating the fact that the Avodah Zarah is in existence, and maybe that would make it a problem. So Rav Nachman said, no problem. Break them and Tavola Bracha, it's good, because we really would rather you get rid of them, even though you're actually having something that we don't want in the world to continue being in the world temporarily so that you can destroy it. So now the Gemara says, last line of Samach Gimel Amud Bet, last two lines, Lema Masea. This Braita should provide a proof for this, because this Braita says, Ein odrim im havei kochavim bekilayim. We're not talking about kilayim. What we're talking about here is you plant two different types of seeds next to each other and they grow together. Okay, now this is a bad thing to do. Even some people say, and there's mentioning this because we're going to talk about it in the context of an idol worshiper. Some people even say, Rabbi Elazar says in Sanhedrin, we learned this, there's the 7 Noachide laws. There's not necessarily 7. Some people had other ones on the list. And Rabbi Elazar added to the list also kilayim. Because what is kilayim? It's against God. God created the world and created the things in the world. And by us doing kilayim, mixing different things together, we're basically interfering with the creation of the world and the way God planned the world. So it's a universal theme, really. Whether or not you say it's in the Sheva Mitzvot, or the Noachide laws or not in the Noachide laws, still you can understand where it's something that's a universal concept. So this Braita says, Ein odrim im havei kochavim bekilayim. You are not allowed to hoe with an ovei kochavim, with an idol worshiper, in the idol worshiper's field, with kilayim. If they have a field full of kilayim, you're not allowed to hoe that field where the kilayim is, because you're basically helping the kilayim to grow. Aval, what you can do is, okrim imo kedei lemeute et hatifla. But you are allowed to uproot the kilayim, work for them to uproot the kilayim. Right now we're going to assume work with a salary to uproot the kilayim in order to get rid of bad things in the world. We don't want kilayim to exist in the world. So if you uproot them, that's a good thing. Savrua. Now before we use this as our proof, because you have to prove something first, which is Savrua, they thought, Hamane Rabbi Akiva. This opinion is Rabbi Akiva's opinion. We're going to see in a minute what Rabbi Akiva says. Za'amal hamekayem bekilayim lokeh. If you, let's say, you're not planting kilayim, okay, that's obviously forbidden. Okay, but what if, and you're not hoeing, which is obviously forbidden, that's helping it grow better. What if you just put up a fence around it to protect it from getting destroyed? That's l'kayem. You're helping it be sustained for longer. So if you're mekayem b'kilayim, according to Rabbi Akiva, not according to the rabbis, you get lashes for that. It's not just to plant in your field kilayim, but even to just do an action to help keep it to survive, right? So animals don't eat it. Now, if you say that, then let's go back. Now we can make the comparison. If this bright holds by Rabbi Akiva, then what's it saying? Even though l'kayem is forbidden, but since now you can get hired and make money to uproot them. Now, even though, exact same thing with the Nesach, even though you actually are going to want them to be there so that you, temporarily, so that you can uproot them. It's in your best interest to actually l'kayem otam, to have them in existence temporarily. And yet, what do we say? Notice it's even the same language. In order to get rid of something bad in the world, we allow you to take a job and make money doing this, even though, right, it's actually you want it to exist. Now, this is only going to be a fair comparison if you hold by Rabbi Akiva that having it exist is a problem. If having it exist is not a problem, then, right, it's only a problem to plant them, then this whole issue is not comparable. Because you have to have a case where you want it to exist, and then we're going to allow you anyway to destroy it and get the salary for it, even though, right, you didn't really, even though you actually wanted it to exist temporarily. And wanting it to exist temporarily is forbidden. It's forbidden by Avodah Zarah because of Abed Habdun. You're supposed to get rid of all that stuff, and it's forbidden by Kilayim based on Rabbi Akiva. How do we know Rabbi Akiva says this? Ditanya, it says in a bright, Haminakesh, if you weed, v'hamachape b'kilayim, if you weed out kilayim, now weeding helps them grow better, right? You're weeding the bad stuff so that the kilayim stuff grows. And mechape b'kilayim, if you have some seeds in the ground and you cover them with soil, that's also loket because that's going to help them grow. Rabbi Akiva Omer af hamakayim. Now Rabbi Akiva says even if you're just putting a fence around or doing something to help it to stay in existence. So that's only Rabbi Akiva holds that. My Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, where does he get this from? Amar Kra sadcha lo tizra kilayim. Now this pasuk, how they get this exactly is a good question, and there's different versions of the text here also. I'll mention them because I think the other version is a little bit more convincing. And I'll mention something the commentaries say about this pasuk. It's a bit of a strange pasuk. Usually when you say don't do something in the Torah, it says don't, right? Lo tirtzach, don't murder, don't do something. Here it starts off, your field, don't plant kilayim. It should have said, don't plant your fields with kilayim, right? Mixed breeds. So because of that, they're going to have this drasha. Ainli ela zoreh. Well, it says don't plant. It sounds like the only prohibition is to plant. Mikayem minayin. How do you know that if you keep it in existence, it's also going to be forbidden? Talmud lomar lo kilayim. Now, it doesn't really say lo kilayim. It says lo tizra kilayim, but they say no kilayim, right? Take the lo and the kilayim, put them together. That's why the other version says it's actually because it says sadcha lo. Your field not, meaning get them out of your field if you have them there, okay? Or try not to have them in your field at all. Even, once you plant them, it's not just planting them, it's also letting them exist. Now, once you establish, according to Rabbi Akiva, that this is prohibited to keep it going, and yet, what does it say? In order to get rid of them, we're actually going to allow you, even though temporarily you want them to be there. This is back to the comparison to the question that they asked and that Rav Nachman answered. Yes, it's obviously okay, because to get rid of Avodah Zarah, even though you want it to be the Nesach to be there, we'd still rather you get rid of it, and therefore you can enjoy the salary. Likewise here, it's all the same thing, and that's a proof. So this Braita serves as a proof for our case. However, the Gemara now, and I'll tell you already the whole thing, the Gemara is going to try to reject this and say, no, this is the rabbis. And then, once you say it's the rabbis' position, it's no longer comparable, because according to the rabbis, it's not even forbidden to keep it going. So we have even though you want to destroy it, you still are doing something wrong by wanting it to stay in existence temporarily, and yet we still allow you to take the money. But if we say it's the rabbis who don't even think it's forbidden to keep it going, it's only forbidden to plant, and to weed and do things that are actually going to make it grow better, then this isn't comparable at all to our case. So that's what the Gemara is going to do. Eventually, though, they are going to say this does serve as proof, and we'll see how we got there. So now the Gemara says, Lo, Hamane Rabbanan he. Now you could say this whole bright is Rabbanan, which again means it has nothing to do with anything. So the Gemara says, wait. And then basically what they're going to say is, right, Okrim, Kedei Lemute. Now there's a few problems with this. Okay, the Gemara is going to raise one problem. Before we even go there, I'll raise another. But the Gemara is going to say, what the Gemara is saying right now, the Braita says, you can uproot them in order to get rid of the tifla, right? In order to get rid of kilayim, you can get rid of it. Now, according according to the rabbis, so the Gemara is going to ask, let's see the Gemara's question, then I'll add mine, which is, I Rabbanan, my iria okrim, afilu kiyumenami shapir dami. If it's the rabbis, why does it say okrim? Even l'kayem would be a problem. Even just to keep it going would be even l'kayem would be permitted. Okay, we're now going to say that if it was the rabbis, now let's look at the Braita for a minute. It says, Eino dream, you can't hoe, but you can be okir. You can uproot. Now, according to the rabbis, you can even l'kayem, you can even put a fence around it. It's not a problem. So if it was the rabbis, it should have said something that was even more permitted, right? That they even permit, it's even more than uprooting. Okay? So it should have said that. The other problem is it says you can be okir, not because, right? You can obviously do that because there's no conflicting issue here, right? The only conflicting issue would be if you can't be Mekayim, well, then maybe you want it to exist, and then therefore you can't get paid for uprooting. But otherwise, it should be totally permitted according to the rabbis. And then why does the Bright have to say Kedei lemiute esatifla in order because you're getting rid of bad things? It should be no matter what, it's permitted. So anyway, that's a side question. Don't worry because the Gemara anyway is going to reinterpret this. So hacha b'mayaskina, and in order now. This is all, they tried to bring a proof for Rav Nachman's question, right, for his answer from this Braita. The only way to bring the proof is if you read it like Rabbi Akiva. So when they rejected it as proof, they said, no, it's not Rabbi Akiva, it's the rabbis. Well, now we said the rabbis doesn't really seem to fit. But now they're going to say, no, it can fit with the rabbi's position, which again means you can't use this as proof. So how could it fit with the rabbis? Well, now who said this was a salary here? When it says okrimimo, maybe you were working for free. Okay, now this is going to actually resolve my issue as to why does it say kedei lemute tifla? Okay, that we're allowed to do it because we want to get rid of bad things in the world, and kilayim is bad. And then you have to think, what's the issue? Okay, the Jew is working for free for the Gentile. Now, what's the issue? It's Rabbi Yehuda who says, this Braita goes according to the rabbis in terms of kiyum kilayim is fine, you don't get lashes for it. The only prohibition is to plant. And it holds like Rabbi Yehuda who holds, if you remember, we learned about lo techanem. One of the explanations, right, it's a lav shebeklalot, it means there's a lot of different prohibitions in it. One of them is you can't give them things for free, which means you can't work for them for free. Even though you can't work for an idolater for free, however, you can do it to uproot kilayim because we want to get rid of kilayim in the world. And that's a whole different explanation, which again has nothing to do with our topic. Because there's no issue of, I want it to exist temporarily so I can destroy it and make money off of it, because in the end, there's no money being made here. This is all, you're doing it for free. So we can't learn from there to our case, and that's the rejection. But now the Gemara says, wait a minute. If we accept Rabbi Yehuda, it actually is really saying the same thing that we've been trying to say all along. Mida Rabbi Yehuda nishmala Rabbi Akiva. From Rabbi Yehuda, you can, even if you don't say this bright as Rabbi Akiva, you could still take the same logic and apply it to Rabbi Akiva and then apply it back to Rav Nachman. How so? Lav Amar Rabbi Yehuda asur litan lam anat chinam aval lemute tifla shapir dami. There's still a conflict of interest here. Rabbi Yehuda said you can't give them anything for free, but to get rid of bad things in the world, you can. Therefore, let's make the next step. Well, the Rabbi Akiva nami. Afagav da'am Rabbi Akiva makayim b'kilayim loke lemute tifla shapir dami. From there, you could say, well, Rabbi Akiva let's apply the same principle. The logic of Rabbi Yehuda would then be the same logic as Rabbi Akiva, which would be the same logic as Rav Nachman. They could have gone straight from Rabbi Yehuda to Rav Nachman. Why did they go back to Rabbi Akiva? Probably because that was their first suggestion of how to read it, and now they're basically saying, even if you read it a different way, it still teaches you the same thing as if it was, as Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is going to hold the same logic, which is what? In one case, it's lo techanem that's conflicting with getting rid of tifla. And getting rid of tifla is going to override that. So with Rabbi Akiva, it's you want the kiyum of the kilayim temporarily, which is prohibited, but it's all just to get rid of tifla, and it's going to be permitted. And then you go back to our case, which is we want to get rid of Avodah Zarah, and even though we want it temporarily to exist so I can get the money, still in the end you're getting rid of Avodah Zarah, and that's a higher value, more important value that will override the prohibition. So in the end, we actually were able to use this as proof. And in fact, the Gemara ends with these three words that I like to use, v'tulo midi. You cannot argue with this. This is clear cut, and there's nothing more to say about it. Okay. Second question. I told you there's going to be three questions. It's very easy structure for today's stuff. Hadar Yatvei v'kamabayilu. They further asked these rabbis a question. By the way, these three questions at the end, there are going to be some overriding ideas that are connected, that connect all three to each other. Okay, like the second will be connected to the first, and the third will be connected to the second. So they sat and they asked the following question. We learned already that if I sell an idol as a Jew, and I get money for it, that money is prohibited just like the idol was. What if an idol worshiper sells their idol, or any idol? And then is that money prohibited? So if let's say they go buy something from me, am I not allowed to benefit from that money because it was idol worship money? But this obviously would create huge complications, right? So the Gemara says, Mi tofeset tameh biyad ovei kochavim o lo? Does the Avodah Zarah move on to the money or not? Okay, now this would create a huge problem because then anytime I would get money from an idolater, I'd have to worry maybe they got it from selling an idol. So in the end, we're going to say this is not a problem, and that's exactly what we're going to see right now. Amar li Rav Nachman, Mistabra, seems to me, okay, this is a little different than last time. Last time he answered definitively. This time and the next time he's going to say, it seems logical that it would seem to me that it's permitted, and you don't have to worry about this. How do I know this? Now he's going to try to prove it from one situation. It's going to get rejected. Then we're going to bring a second situation that's going to prove it. There were these people who were converting that came before Rabbi Bar Avua. Amar lehu, zilu zabinu komadi lehu, v'tu it gairu. Go first, sell everything you have, really meaning all your idols, and then come to me to convert. Sell them first, and then come to me to convert. My time, what's the reason? Mishum de kasavar, it must be he thought it was permitted, and that's why he said sell it, you'll have the money from it, and you can benefit from the money because you're idol worshippers now. Once you convert, you won't, right? Then it'll be too late. But when you're idolaters, you can sell it and benefit. To which the Gemara rejects and says, and this is going to connect with our next question. But if you remember, we learned that a Jew who wants to nullify an idol and say this isn't an idol anymore can't do that. But an idolater can nullify idols without a problem. So what Rabbi Bar Avua meant is go nullify your idols, then sell them, and then you can have the money. But if they didn't nullify them, maybe it wouldn't work. Okay, so you can't prove it from there because it's very possible he asked them to nullify it first. It's possible not, we don't know, but there's no way to prove it. So that didn't work. Elamehacha. So then we say, okay, we're going to learn it from here. Yisrael shayano sheba ovei kochavim maneh. We have a Jew who was owed, this is a Tosefta. A Jew was owed money by an ovei kochavim, 100 zuzim. Umachar Avodah Zarah. The idolater sold an idol, ve'evilo, and then returned the loan with the money they got from the idol. This is what I said before, right? Otherwise, we'd never be able to get money from them. Yenesech ve'evilo, or he sold yenesech, and then brought it to the Jew to return the loan. Mutal, the Jew can take the money. Okay, we could have stopped the sugya right here. It would have been much simpler. And yes, this is permitted, and we're done really. This proves it. So we're good. But they brought the second line, and because they brought the second line, they now have to distinguish what's the difference between the first case and the second case. We're going to get there in a minute. But now we go to another case. That Tosefta mentioned. Okay, so let's just be clear. We had Rav Nachman said idolaters who sell idols, the money is not forbidden. How do we know it? Because the idolater, right, we tried to prove it from the ger case, that didn't work, because maybe that was different, maybe they nullified it first. But in this case, the idolater sold the idol and then gave the Jew back the loan, and it worked, and the Jew could get the money. So it's obviously fine. And now we get to the second case in that Tosefta, and for that we're going to go off a little for a while on trying to understand this case. But if he said, the idolater said, go, he said, you want the money? No problem. Wait a little while. I'm going to go sell my idol, or I'm going to sell my yenesech, and then I'll bring you the money. Then it's forbidden. So the Gemara asks, what's the difference in the first case where it was permitted, where he sold the idol, gave him the money, between when he said, well, wait for me, I'm going to go sell my idol and bring it back to you. So what's the reason? Because in the second case, and here all of a sudden we get to something this is the connection between this case and the previous. You imagine these guys were sitting around thinking about things and then connected and said, oh, I have this other question, and then all connected back. Anyway, he says, it must be because the Jew, when the idolater says, wait, I'm going to go sell my idol and bring it, and then I'll bring you the money, for those few moments or a few days or whatever time it is, the Jew wants the idols to exist. And that is forbidden. The Jew can't benefit from wanting, that's the whole thing, right? Now, in the previous case, we were allowed to do it because in the end, it was because they were getting rid of it. In this case, it wasn't they were getting rid of it. It was just getting sold and they were then benefiting. So in this case, it can't be done. Now, that's really the answer. The problem is the Gemara is going to question that answer from a different source, but we'll resolve it. Wait, just because the Jew wants the idol to exist shouldn't be forbidden. Look at this case. There's a Mishnah that says, we have a father who's an idolater. He has two sons. One's an idolater and one is a convert. So now they're Jewish. So what happens when the father dies? So now he leaves over idols and other things. So the Jew who converted says, can say to his brother, Tol ata avodah zarah v'ani ma'ot. You take the idols, I'll take the money. Tol ata yenesech v'ani perot. You take the yenesech, I'll take the produce. Okay? In other words, they can divide it up so that the ger gets the convert, the Jew gets no share of the idols, no problem. But im mishabau l'reshut hager asur. But if first they all inherited everything, and the ger had it, and then tries to trade with the brother and say, listen, I don't want the idols, let's switch, then they can't do it, because that's a Jew selling idol worship to his brother, basically. So it works in the first case. It doesn't work in the second case. But what do you see? It works in the first case, even though the ger, the convert, obviously wants the idol to exist, because if the idol doesn't exist, they're going to have to share whatever's left, the produce, with his brother. So here you see, even though he wants it to exist, he's actually allowed to benefit, right? He can take the money. So wanting to benefit from something doesn't mean it's going to be forbidden, which is what we tried to say in the previous. The Jew wanted it to exist so that he would get his loan back, and it was forbidden. Okay, don't worry, we're going to explain this. I'm a Rava Bar Ula, but we're going to have two attempts. Okay, the first attempt won't work, which is Rava Bar Ula. Rava Bar Ula says, "Matnitim ba'avodah zarah mitchaleket lefi shvareha." This Mishnah we just quoted, with the ger and the two brothers, the convert and the idolater, that's when it was idols that were made of silver or gold, where if they broke and they weren't idols anymore, they would still have value. And that's why it's not that he wanted the idols to exist; he wanted the item to be in existence, but for the worth of the object, the materials. Okay, the gold itself or the silver itself. So the Gemara says, okay, wait a minute. Tinach Avodah Zarah, that works for the Avodah Zarah example, the idol. But Yenesech was also in there. So take the Yenesech and I'll take the Perot. But Ma'ika Lamemar, you can't say Yenesech is valuable in its broken parts. There is no such thing. To which they say, what do you mean? Cheres Hadriani. Remember that Cheres, that the Hadrian earthenware shards that they would take around? And then you could say, right, that could be in broken pieces. It's still worth it to him because then you could soak them and take the wine out. So that would be an answer. But the Gemara says, but either which way, this is still a case where the ger wants it to exist so it doesn't get stolen, so it doesn't get lost. They still want the existence of the idol or of the Yenesach. So this isn't a good, this basically seems to indicate that when you want it to exist, it's actually permitted. And we said a minute right before, if you want it to exist, it's forbidden, and that explains that second part of the Tosefta. So Rav Papa is going to bring a different answer, which is a super interesting answer. El Amar Rav Papa, Yerushat HaGer Kamarta. Wait a minute. You're talking about the inheritance of a ger from his father? Shani Yerushat HaGer to Akilu Barabanan. The rabbis were super lenient with inheritance laws for converts. Okay? Why? Zarah Shema Yachzor L'Kukulo. They didn't want the convert to then leave Judaism and say, you know what? It's not worth it to be a Jew if I can't now collect my half, right, from non-idol worship items. Then, because I actually want the idols to exist, then I'm just going to go back to being not Jewish because it's not worth it to me. I'll lose my whole inheritance, right? People get very worked up about inheritance. And because of that, the rabbis were lenient. And in fact, going now to Amabet, Tanya Namihachi, here's a braita to support this answer. There's a braita on this Mishnah that says, in what is this case? It's a case where they inherited. But if they were partners, you couldn't say, oh, you take the idols and I'll take the produce. And right, if you were partners in a business, a Jew and a non-Jew, you can't do that. You take the profits of the idols and I'll take the profits of the rest. Okay, that's not allowed because this is a special dispensation for converts. So in the end, this was just to answer the question, what's the difference between the Reisha and the Seifa? And we said because in the Seifa, they actually want the idols to exist, the Jew wants it to exist so they can get their loan back. And that answer does stand. They tried to reject it from this source, but this source in the end is explained it's a unique situation by the inheritance of a convert. Question number 3. Hadur Yatvei v'kama ba'elu. So they further ask the next question. Ger toshav ma'u shivatel avodah zarah. What about a ger toshav? We're going to see in a little bit what the 3 interpretations of what a ger toshav is, but the main thing you need to know right now is it's a person who doesn't convert to Judaism completely, but they do accept certain parts of Judaism upon themselves, okay? Certain basic tenets of belief. And this is a ger toshav. Now the question is, so a ger toshav is still not Jewish. However, well, they're not idol worshippers either, because they don't do idol worship. So if they don't do idol worship, can they nullify? Okay, now this connects with the previous when we were talking about nullification of idols. Can they nullify idols? Do you say, de palach mevatil, de lo palach lo mevatil? In order to nullify it, you have to be someone who worshipped it. If you worshipped it, you can then nullify it and say, I thought this was significant, but now I realize this is nothing. But if you never worshipped it to lo palach, you never worshipped it lo mevatil, you can't nullify it because you never believed it in the first place. So just like a Jew can't nullify it, a non-Jew never believed in it also can't. So that's the question. O dilma, or do we say, kol de bar mine mevatil, v'ha bar minehu. Anyone of that type meaning they're not Jewish. Anyone who's not Jewish is considered of a similar type. So if we say an idolater can nullify it, then anyone not Jewish can nullify it. Those are the 2 sides. Amarlu Rav Nachman. Again, Rav Nachman answers. Mistaber de palach mevatil de lo palach lo mevatil. It seems like that when it worshipped it, they can nullify it. If you didn't worship it ever, you can't. And that's his answer. For this sugya, we're going to have 2 difficulties from Tanaitic sources, but we're going to resolve them both. Meitive. First question. We have a source. Yisrael shematzah, this is also a Tosefta. Yisrael shematzah avodah zarah b'shuk. If a Jew finds an idol in the shuk, ad shelo bata liyado, until it's in their possession, omer lo veko, and they didn't yet take it into their possession, omer lo veko chavim, umevatla. They say to an idolater in the shuk, can you nullify it? No problem. Umisha bata liyado, but once it gets into the Jew's possession, eino omer lo veko chavim umevatla. You can't go ask an idolater to nullify it. Mipnei shamru, because they say, here comes the key line, Ove kochavim mevatel avodah zarah shelo v'shel chavero. An idolater can nullify their own idol and their friend's idol. Bein ovda, bein she'en ovda. Whether that idolater worshipped it or didn't worship it. Now, my ovda or my she'en ovda. Now they finished quoting the Tosefta, but now they want to understand what does it mean whether they worshipped it or didn't worship it. Elam, and now it sounds like it's saying whether they worshipped it themselves or someone else worshipped it, but that's kind of the same as shelo v'shel chavero, right? Either their own or their friends. So elam, idi ove kochavim, hainu shelo v'shel chavero. If you say they're both talking about idolaters, whether they worshipped it, whether they didn't, is whether it's their own or someone else's. Well, it can't be that because ella. Sorry, I didn't read it right. If it means the idolater who either worshipped it or didn't worship it, that's the exact same thing as we said in the previous phrase, which was their own or someone else's. Because what it means is I didn't worship it, someone else worshipped it. Elalav ovda ove kochavim Sorry, I didn't read that right. Elalav Ovda is Ovei Kochavim. What does it mean you worshipped it? That's an idolater. Maisha Ein Ovda. What does it mean even if you didn't worship it? Ger Toshav. That's someone who never worshipped idols. And what do you see here? Who can nullify it? Even someone who never worshipped it before, meaning a Ger Toshav. Ushma Mina, Ger Toshav, Nami Mevatel. And that seems to go against Rav Nachman and say, even a Ger Toshav can nullify it. To which the Gemara says, no. No, really you could say they're both talking about idolaters. Now we have to explain. What's the difference between Shelo v'shel chavero and Ben Ovda ben Lo Ovda? Utkamart, Hainu Shelo v'shel chavero. Now you say this all one and the same then? No. Reisha ze v'zeh le'po'or v'zeh le'markulis. The first case is you wanted to nullify, the idolater nullifies their idol or their friend's idol. This is if their idol is, let's say, Pa'or, they worship, and their friend worships Pa'or. Or their idol is Markulis, and their friend worships Markulis. So the first is saying, if you worship an idol that you maybe didn't worship yourself, it's someone else's, but you generally worship that God, then you can nullify it. And the Seifa is Zel Pa'or v'Zel Markulis. Bein Ovda, bein Lo Ovda means you do worship idols, but you didn't worship that particular idol. So if I am an idolater who worships Pa'or, and my friend worships Markulis, and my friend's idol is there, as an idolater, I can cancel the Markulis, even though it's not an idol I worship. But it doesn't mean that a Ger Toshav can nullify. They never worshipped any idol. And that's how we resolve the first contradiction. Second source, Meitive. Ezehu Ger Toshav. Now we're going to see the three opinions. Okay, it's going to take a while till we get to the important sentence here. What is a Ger Toshav? So the first opinion is Kol shekibel alav b'fnei shlosha chaverim, in front of three people, meaning Jews, like a beit din. It's like a formal process. Shelo la'avod avodah zarah. They take upon themselves that they're not going to worship idols. Divrei Rabbi Meir. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. Chachamim omrim kol shekibel alav sheva mitzvot shekiblu alehem b'nei Noach. The rabbis say it's anyone who accepts the sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach. Achirim omrim, third opinion, elu lo ba'u lechlal ger toshav. Those people are not called a ger toshav. That's not enough. El ezu ger toshav. What is a ger toshav? Ze ger ochel nevelot shekibel alav l'kayem kol mitzvot hamurot b'torah. This is right. Wait for this. It's a ger who eats nevela, eats non-kosher meat. Okay, that wasn't shechted properly, but keeps all the other mitzvot. Some people say it's only the negative commandments, not the positive ones. But either way. Right, two different opinions here. Other than Isur Nevela. Why the prohibition of Nevela? Because if you remember, the Torah says you can either sell it to a non-Jew or give it as a gift to a Ger Toshav. So it seems clear from the Torah that a Ger Toshav can eat Nevela. So it's everything other than that. That makes them a Ger Toshav. Yeah. And obviously they didn't undergo a conversion process either, right? Okay. That's what is a Ger Toshav. Now the Braita continues. What can you do in terms of giving them your wine to watch? Are you allowed to or not allowed to? Because in a sense, they don't worship idols. On the other hand, they're not really Jews. So miyachadim etzlo yayin, you can bring them wine to watch temporarily. That's what miyachadim. Ve'em mafkidin etzlo yayin, but you can't give them as a pikado, meaning a deposit to watch for a long time. Afilu be'ir sheruba Yisrael. Even if it's a city that's mostly Jews, you still can't give it to the Ger Toshav to watch for the long term. And miyachadim etzlo yayin, you can give him wine temporarily. Afilu be'ir sheruba goyim. Even a city that's mostly non-Jews, if it's for a short time, you can do that. Okay, we're still not up to the important part. Shamno kiyeno, his oil is like his wine. So the Gemara says, Shamno kiyeno sakadatach. Wait a minute, how could you say the wine is like the oil is like the wine? Shemen mikave yenesech. What? We have to forbid the oil like we forbid the wine to benefit from because the oil was offered as a libation. We don't have such a thing of oil being offered as libations for idols. Ella, it must be they got it wrong. This is just correcting the Braita. We kind of paused the Braita for a minute to fix this. Ella yeno kishamno. Their wine is like their oil. In other words, if you take their wine, you don't have to treat it and forbid it b'hana'ah like you would an idolater's wine, but treat it like oil, which their oil is forbidden. This is before they repealed the whole Zarah. their oil is permitted to eat, forbidden to drink or eat, consume, but permitted to benefit from. So their wines are permitted to benefit from, even though you can't drink them. Ulishar kol davar, and here's the key line, for all other things, hareu keovei kochavim. He's treated like an idolater. So we're going to come back to that in a minute. We have to finish up the Braita. Rabbi Shimon, it should be Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omeo. Yeno yenesach, he disagrees with the previous line about yeno kishamno, and is permitted to benefit from, even though you can't drink it. So according to the first version of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, yeno yenesach, we're strict on their wine. It's forbidden even to benefit from. But Amrela, some people say mutar b'shtia, it's permitted to drink. Okay, meaning Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel has an extreme position, either extremely lenient or extremely strict. Anyway, going back to the point, the Gemara returns us to why we're here. Because remember, let's just go back. Rav Nachman said a ger toshav can't be mevatel, can't nullify idols. So the Gemara says, look at what it says here. Katani miyah l'shar kol dvarav hareu kovei kochavim l'mayachata. What's that line for? To say it's treated like an idolater for all other things. Lavdim mevatel avodah zarah keovei kochavim. Does it not mean that they can nullify idols just like an idolater can? So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, no, not for that purpose. What does it mean? Litain reshut ulevatel reshut. He's treated like an idolater when it comes to laws of, okay, we're going to have to go all the way back to Eruvin, for those who learned Eruvin, of laws within a courtyard. He's treated like an ovei kochavim, like an idolater, and not like a Jew. What are these laws? So if you live in a shared courtyard, this is a lot of people lived in houses that opened up into the same courtyard, and you want to carry there for Shabbat. What do? Everybody puts some food together, and you all basically are joined together as if this is one big domain. But what if someone, a Jew, was there but didn't join, and then it's Shabbat, and if one Jew in the courtyard doesn't join, you can't carry in the courtyard because it's not a joint domain. So if this happens, let's say the Jew was traveling and came back just before Shabbat, and there wasn't time to ask. So on Shabbat, you can say, can you be mevatel your reshut? Can you give us all permission to go through your domain? And basically give up your share. Okay? Now, don't really. It just means like, I'm saying you can all use my house. Okay? If they do that, then the courtyard becomes a shared courtyard and it's permitted. But if there's an idolater, not only can you not ask them before Shabbat, or certainly not on Shabbat, but there is no bitul reshut. And they can't even join the Eruv Chatzera. The only way to deal with it, if there's a non-Jew living in the courtyard, is to rent out their space for Shabbat. Okay, this is what we do with Eruv. We pay some money to the city. It's like a rental fee. So, now we're going to say, okay, this line is, Litain reshut ulevater reshut, to give permission or to nullify your, like to say, my reshut is nullified to all the rest of you. Well, this ger toshav is treated like an idolater, meaning they can't do this. Only a Jew can do this. And now we're going to read it inside. Uchidetanya, and as it says in the following Braita, Yisrael mumar, now they're in a different case. This is a Jew, this Braita is talking about a Jew who left the religion, okay, doesn't keep Shabbat, but mishamer Shabbato b'shuk. In the shuk in public, they keep Shabbat. In private, they don't. Mivatel reshut, they're still considered a Jew. And therefore, they can nullify their part and allow people to carry in the courtyard. She'en mishamer Shabbato b'shuk. But if you don't keep Shabbat in public, desecrate Shabbat in public, even though you're a Jew, ein mevatel reshut. You can't then be mevatel your reshut on Shabbat. We don't allow it. We treat them like an idolater for this halacha. Mipnei she'amru, and here's the line where we're going to prove what we just said. Yisrael noten reshut u'mevatel reshut, u'be'ovei kochavim ad she'yiskol. So a Jew can give reshut and nullify their reshut. Okay, those are two of similar things. We're going to see in a minute exactly how you do that. But an idolater can only do it we can only rent his space. It's the only way to solve the Eruv Chatzerot issue, and that obviously can only be done before Shabbat. Okay, and therefore, again, this was all going back to say that line didn't mean they're like an idolater for nullifying idols. No, they're like an idolater for laws of Eruv. Now the Gemara is just going to end with Ketzad. How does a Jew be mevatel reshut or give reshut? Either says, Omer lo, rishuti knu yalacha, my domain is acquired by you, I'm giving you the rights to it, or rishuti mevutel elecha, or it's nullified to you. Basically, I'm nullifying my share in in my my house, and then that will be, nullified to the rest of them. Kana ve'ein sarich liskot. That is enough of a kinyan, right? That works. Just to say that, they don't need to do any sort of formal act of zechiyav, saying, I'm giving over some part of my domain to you. No formal act, just the words alone are sufficient, and that's how you resolve the Erev Chatzera problem on Shabbat. Okay, with that we finish for today. Let's do a quick review. What we had is these 3 questions that these rabbis asked, and Rav Nachman answered each time. First was, Scharo lishbor b'yei nesach. Mahu, right? Can you rent, can you be hired to basically break barrels of Yenesach? In the end, we said yes, even though you want it to exist, right? We allow it. Then we had, can Avodah Zarah that gets sold by a non-Jew, can that be, does it, when an idol worshiper sells an idol, does that move, does the prohibition to benefit from the idol move on to the money? And we said, no, it does not. And then we had the third question, which was, can a ger toshav nullify idols like an idolater? And the answer is no, because they never worshipped it. They don't have the power to nullify it. And on each of those things, we had different questions and went off. And that's the end of our daf for today. Wishing everyone a good day.